to Write Your Book Your Way, the interview series that goes behind the scenes of real self-published books to explode the myth that there is one right way to write your book. I'm your host, Kris Emery, and I am a non-fiction editor and author of my own book, Destination Author. Today, I am joined by Chenae Carey, who is an intuitive business mentor. We work together on her book, Is Your Business a Prison? Let's dive into the behind the scenes of her experience. Hi, everyone. So today we are here with my friend and entrepreneur, Chenae Carey, and we are going to talk about her book that she wrote this year. But instead of hearing it from me, I'd love you to hear that directly from Chenae herself, because I always think authors describe what they do best. So Chenae, tell us how your book relates to your business. So what is the book about, and what is it that you do, and how do they smush?
Thank you. I still am enjoying being called an author. Thank you for reminding me, because I've written a book, but like being called an author is still something that I'm just like, oh, that's true, actually. So thank you
Growing
for that.
into still, yeah, like
Yeah.
it takes a while to feel comfortable, I think.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, thank you. So to answer your question, my book is called Is Your Business a Prison? Question mark. It's very big bold title, but it links in with my business in the sense that in my work, I do intuitive business coaching and mentoring for businesses that are run by women who want to, make a difference in the world. And so the book relates to my service and my work in the world, because so many of the clients that come to me had this idea in their mind's eye of how they wanted their business to look when they launched it. And this kind of idea of entrepreneurial freedom that they wanted, right? And
how they wanted it to look, but also how they wanted it to feel.
Exactly, right? It's like, here's how I imagine it, and here's what it looks like, here's what it feels like, here's, all of the perfectly picturesque vision. And often what's the reality when people are coming to me is, regardless of the stage of business where they're at, it doesn't actually matter. More often than not, their business is actually more like a prison than that vision of entrepreneurial freedom that they started out looking towards and heading towards. So my book is an antidote for that.
Yes, getting them back on track in a multitude of ways. So what I loved about your book is how practical it is, and it really just gets in there and makes such a lot of practical suggestions told through case studies and stories, but also laid out very clearly. And I found it very clear to read. I agree with you wholeheartedly that it doesn't matter what stage of business you're at, because this is not a level thing, and I actually hate the entire idea that you can be at a level of business, and people are always trying to like level up. There aren't levels, guys. Okay, we are where we are, but yours is a very holistic take, because you're bringing in how it feels, but you're addressing that feeling on multiple different levels. You're addressing it personally, you're addressing it from a professional tools and tricks and tips and all sorts of things that are very practical. So you've got the blend of practical, spiritual, emotional, like all the things going on, which is so you, like knowing you for real in the flesh in person. So I just thought that your book was a really beautiful expression of all that you come across as in your business. So let's talk about where it came from, like where it started. How did you come up with the idea for the title, and can we see it as well? Do you have
of course. Here's one I prepared. I'll bring it up a little bit closer so you can see. Is your business a prison? And then here it says the keys to unlocking entrepreneurial freedom and growing a fulfilling business you love. Note that it doesn't say from what stage of business it's growing, because you can grow from any point. And it's a guidebook for heart-centered women. So that's my, my peeps. That's who I work with. So there's my book, and then the back's just a little bit of text and in my pink and my navy colors. So a little bit on entrepreneurial freedom and a little bit about me.
Love it.
Nice thin one, very practical. So I didn't want it to be tens of thousands of words, because there's actually quite a lot to do in these pages, even though it's quite small.
And you could come back to that again and again and get so much out of it, because each key issue, which you call a prison, each way in which we trap ourselves in our business, and I say ourselves because it's very much nobody else is doing it to you, can come up again and again and again, like we said, at all of these different levels, or as you progress through business life, and you can go back and actually probably even apply the exact same one of the exact same key over and over again, or you might just take a different key to that same prison. So it's really like locking a set of doors, because we're often, it's a mindset thing, right? We're often going through the same processes in our mind, no matter where we're at. So so where did you come up with this idea? You obviously worked with a lot of people. So are your clients your inspiration?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. And it's funny though, because my mum is also a former correctional officer as well. So there's kind of like prisons and, freedom and all of that kind of stuff in my family as well, which I didn't sort of connect the dots. I didn't connect those dots. I couldn't, it's certainly not at the initial stage of like this idea coming into life, but it then landed. I was like, oh, that's really interesting, because the running metaphor obviously is that the business is the prison and that we're looking for that freedom on the other side. And I was like, oh, there's a little familiar connection there. So yeah, a side note there. But yes, my clients are definitely my inspiration. And as you mentioned before, the prison, so there's 6 prisons in the book, like different prisons that we all, I think, find ourselves in from time to time, and depending on our journey, what that looks like, it'll be one or the other or a couple. Out of those prisons, there is a case study, which is a collection of stories. It's no one person for any of the case studies.
Avatar, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really an avatar, because I've called it Hannah the Health Practitioner or whatever. But there are stories and experiences and moments that I've kind of collected over the years of serving my clients, and I can see patterns, like like an archetype, if you will, because an archetype is just a pattern that repeats itself over and over and over again. What we give it the name is then how we can kind of spot it, and I can work with that. So there's those patterns that are weaved into so many of my clients' experiences that are what form the prisons in this book. So yeah, definitely came from my work with them.
And so what was the spark of getting going with the book project? When did you sit down and be like, okay, this is it, I'm doing it this time? Because I think books percolate for a long time. You've obviously you've collected these experiences and you've worked with people over a number of years. So what is the moment where you're like, okay, this is the format that it needs to come out in right now?
Yeah, I was actually doing a program, doing some postgraduate studies in spiritual directorship, and the final module of the 18 months of the training was to write a thesis, is what it was called. And it was basically a 10,000 word piece of whatever we could write. We could do videos, it was up to us, but 90% of the cohort do a written piece, and it's a book usually. And the process itself was actually mapped out. My mentor did a really beautiful job of it, because it was phase 1 was like flex your writing muscles, and it was mandatory to complete the 10,000 words to graduate. It was the final assessment piece to then be sent off into the world with our certification. But the first part was the 5,000 word just ebook. It was like, if you're writing a book, then here's part 1, getting into, inviting us to do things like morning pages, which is a practice that a lot of writers, I'm sure, are familiar with from the Artist's Way. But there was that invitation to write an ebook. And as I sat down and started fleshing out some ideas, so I didn't come into the book writing process with, here's what I need to write. And I because I've heard a lot of people have got that story. Like, I know I need to write a book, and they're collecting things, but I hadn't collected these stories that I refer to in those case studies as things to then write about in a book. Like I knew that there was a book coming somewhere at some point, but it hadn't kind of formed into any idea. It was sort of just things at the time. So I sat down and started writing, and there was a few sort of, I went off on this tangent and on this tangent, and before long I was, and it landed, and it was really clear and really quick and effortless. But it was because the conditions were ripe that I guess the inspiration landed. It wasn't that the inspiration was sitting there and I had to create the conditions, which I think might be a little bit different to some people's book
Very
writing
much
journey.
so. I was just thinking how often it's the other way around. We've got this idea and we need to sit down and somehow make it into a book because we know a book is what it is and where it needs to go. Whereas very few people, I think, at least as far as I know, and in my experience of working with people and how they've come to me, very few people are told you need to write a book. Doesn't matter what it's about, free reign on the topic. The book is the goal, and then they have to come up with something. And actually that practice or that challenge of come up with something for a book would be a real rewarding, I think, experience, but like using a completely different part of your brain to, I've got an idea and let's roll with it, you know. I think I've only worked with one person before who was part of a program. Book was part of the program that they had to complete. It was mandatory part of getting through. It was a year-long business incubator, and a book was a quarterly goal, I think it was. So one of the major milestones, and it came from you have to have this. And she was like you, she didn't harbor this deep longing for a book that many, many people have. But I do have a lot of people in my world who know that a book is a really helpful tool that needs to be part of the suite of things that they offer. And so if there are people watching this today who are in that cohort who feel more like they need a book rather than they really desperately, urgently want a book, then this is a really really important process to tune into and listen up and what Chenae is going to tell us next. So you know what question is coming. What did the process then look like while you were in it, while you were writing?
So I did the first 5,000 words and it was really organic, like it poured out of me. It's like one of the recommendations in preparation for the writing part was to read Big Magic, Elizabeth Gilbert. And I had already, so I had it on Audible and I just kind of sped listened to it again. And it was just, it kind of ripened everything up. So I'm pretty confident that that added to the whole experience, like that richness of creativity, just create for the sake of creating without the pressure, because that's one of the key messages in the book, right? It's like, just create for the sake of creating. Don't create because your livelihood depends on it, or, you know, whether you can put food on the table is depending on it. Like, just create. And my business was ticking along over here, doing its thing. And so the book was a side project for that. And that not needing it to be anything was so freeing, I think. And I love that that's, you know, in sync with the book about freedom. But I digress. So we did the 5,000 words, got some really positive feedback about what was in there. And I had only planned on doing the theme of entrepreneurial freedom and the prisons for the ebook, because by that point I had something in mind that kind of landed that I wanted to write to. And I realized very quickly when the positive feedback came through, and I started then considering what it would then take to start another project on another theme with we had a very short timeline to produce the 10,000 words. And I think it was maybe like less than half a year to put it all together. And that included one of the 5,000 and then moving in and final submission by the end of the year. So I started to realize really quickly that if I was to keep this theme and put that into an ebook and then start fresh over here, it was going to take a lot of extra effort. And in fact, this was actually really good and could be fleshed out and turned into something really meaningful had it had a bigger word count. And so it just happened organically. So I went from having 2 prisons, which are the first 2 in the book, if my memory serves me. And then the rest, it's like, well, because there's so much else that I want to say. And then, of course, 10,000 words allowed me to do that. There was other patterns that I had seen that I wanted to speak to and put a name to and a voice to. And it kind of just evolved. So I'm someone who works really well to structure and accountability. And I think the benefit of that is that there was a deadline in there, and it wasn't a self-imposed deadline, because we tend to, I don't know if I'm just speaking for myself, but I suspect
I can already tell what this is doing.
We all flex on our own deadlines. Like, it's like, I'll do this, but then, I'm the only one that I'm going to let down if I don't do that. So I'm kind of, we move the goalposts on ourselves. Whereas I will never forget the words. It was like, if you don't submit it by the end of the year, I will not read it. And also, if you submit anything beyond 10,000 words, I won't read anything beyond 10,000 words. So we had some really defined parameters, which I like, I was just sinking my teeth into it. It was really delicious to not have all the time in the world and all of this, like, kind of just too much space around me. It was really kind of tightly confined, and I just had to make time to write, and then it kind of poured out of me.
It's a huge issue with people writing their books. Nobody is making you do this. Nobody is telling you it has to be done by a certain time. So the timeline is very nebulous, and there's no urgency unless you are being urged by an audience to write a particular book. And even then, you're not really accountable to them, because it's a nice to have for them, but like, nobody's going to die if you don't write your book.
No.
Only you might die inside a little bit if you don't write your book. Some people have got something that they absolutely must express. They don't really have this issue because it's like they can't hold it in. They pour it out. But that issue of not having anyone telling you, like, this has got to be done and it has to be done by then, can really mess with people. And so a lot of people book in me as an editor just to give themselves like that date. But another way of doing it is to, is public accountability, to actually plan your launch and that kind of thing. But you didn't need to put that very big, loud, shouty book launch out there, because you brought people along on the journey, and you had the accountability from somewhere else. And also, so that accountability being one thing, but you mentioned feedback there as well. What kind of feedback are you talking about? Are you talking about like somebody, and I know you worked with a professional afterwards because you worked with me, but at the time, are we talking like a group of beta readers or the program leader? Like, who is giving you that kind of feedback, and why did it give you that much encouragement to elaborate and make your book the bigger thing that it turned into?
Yeah, it was the program leader who reviewed, but she also, there was two aspects to the feedback. It was, submitted as a Google Doc, and there was comments and things weaved through that were, specific to the person. But we also, in a group Zoom call, much like you and I are on today, but all of us, we had each person's writing brought up, because it was,
oh my God, that's terrifying, but also very cool.
Yeah. So the container of that program itself was, I mean, by the time we got to the third 6-month block, we were well beyond, like, everything was for everybody to see. There was so much that we'd worked through in terms of fears and a few other different quite vulnerable categories. But the idea of having your work put up in front of everybody also really, for me personally, I find that really motivating to do a damn good job. Like, I'm not going to submit a half-assed, half-completed draft that like, it just wasn't going to happen. And so I managed my time really well to ensure that was the case. So there was twofold, I guess, in terms of the feedback. There was the, on the Google Doc, some finer things, but then the overall gist and the overall flow, and without reading all of the 5,000 words, there was opportunities to have feedback in a group space. Because for me, I learned what not to do from some of the things that I saw in mine and others, but also what was encouraged as well. And it's not that the person giving the feedback was just, any old person who put together some program. She's an academic with a PhD, and
Yes.
there's an element there. And I think the part of me that really respects that wanted to make sure that I did the best possible thing that I could do in terms of submitting some good quality writing. Like, I like to think that by the time it got to you, it wasn't a dog's breakfast, and it was, a decent manuscript that had had a bit of love and effort put into it, instead of just, sending off the first draft.
Absolutely. And would you ever have signed up to any other kind of container to make a book happen? Would you have joined like a writing group in that kind of sense?
I don't think so. It's never been, I mean, I've seen them around, and yes, they're there, and I knew that there was a book somewhere, but it hadn't, I should say, ever been a really strong pull to like, yes, come and do this. This absolutely needs to happen. Having said that, it might be different now. Like if I were to do it again, that might be different. Like that accountability container, knowing that I can produce the result, might be that support that I might find helpful.
So interesting, because I think a lot of people that I work with are in the same boat as you, wouldn't even think about joining a writers group. And the people, also on the flip side, the people that I see in writers groups, they don't tend to be entrepreneurs and first-time nonfiction writers who are in this online business space. They tend to be people who want to write a novel. So lots of fiction. And if they are nonfiction, they tend to be dabblers, people who want to write in their retirement, for example. So a lot of people in your shoes are not going to find necessarily like-minded people to bounce the right ideas around with in that kind of place, or even think to join one. So the fact that it's part of a different incubator where you're really comfortable being vulnerable with people, and I imagine that comfort being vulnerable with people also fed into how emboldened people were to give you really genuinely useful feedback, and not just be a friend who's, oh, that's your nice member of the family. Oh, that's nice, darling. Well done. Like actually meaningful feedback that you can do something with. So awesome.
Yeah.
Then how did it become a finished thing? So you've got all of this feedback to implement. That could be and I know from experience, that is a time where authors, they've just tightened everything up, they've got everything down, they've made things more and more concrete, and then it starts to open back up again because you've got all the opinions, and it can like spiral off in lots of directions. So how did you know it was time to hand it over for editing and then really ready for an audience to consume?
Well, I knew it was ready to hand. Well, I mean, we put a deadline when you and I agreed to start working together. So that was like, it had to be that deadline. That was really helpful. But more so, I guess, I'm like, this is not going to be a project that just sits on my computer, sitting nowhere. That was really important. Like I could see that there's that potential to put that effort in to create it and then do nothing with it. And I'm like, I really want that sense of satisfaction of producing something to its fullness. So not really, I guess, answering your question wholeheartedly, but the knowing that it was complete was when I could see through the manuscript. It's like, this flows into this, flows into this, flows into this, and these are isolated enough that they make sense on their own, but they also have connecting thoughts. Like, it was taking what I'd written and sort of zooming myself out and looking at it from a bird's eye view as best as you can, because it gets to a point, of course, with everybody, I'm sure time and time again, that you can't see the forest for the trees because you've spent so much time on it. But there was also, for me, because a lot of my work is, I do practical strategy, but I also do energy work and intuitive work. I just have that I just know, like, there's that feeling that it's ready and it's complete. So it ended up going from 10,000 words to, and honestly, the conclusion was rubbish on what I submitted, because I knew that she wouldn't read beyond the 10,000. So it was like, okay, and we're done. Bye. Like, the conclusion was not complete, but I didn't mind. Like, that could easily have been rounded out, and it was later, and I ended up with about 17,000 words, I think, in the end. So that period of refining it and fleshing it all out without the limits of a word count, which took me a little bit back to my university days. It's like, here's the word count situation again. But then once those ideas and concepts were all fleshed out, I was like, okay, I don't want to produce something that's a little half-assed. And I want to, like I said, not put my first draft out into the world. So that's where you came in. I'm like, I'm actually prepared. I've put a lot into this. I'm prepared to invest in it, even though I would say it's quite a small book. It was worth my investment in actually getting it done properly in terms of editing, so that it was a good quality thing. Because if it's going to match in with my business, if I just half-assed it, it wouldn't be congruent with everything else that I do, which is really important for that integrity for me and what I do.
And not just integrity, but for the strategy to actually work, for you to, if you're getting people in with a book and then what they're seeing in other parts of your business are different in some way, then those aren't going to be the right people for these things as well. So, and I'm not saying that everybody who's ready to read the book is ready to work with you, but eventually you want those people to be the same people, because from a strategic point of view, that just makes sense. But yeah, so what I really love about your book is that you did kind of throw the rule book out the window as far as word count is concerned, and you've mentioned it a few times. So let's just get this out in the open, because I think it's really important.
Yeah.
When it comes to nonfiction, books can be any length, especially if they're only going to be digital, but even if they go into print. And it's really important not to pad things. And I'm so glad that you said all you had to say for this book. You had a really clear container that was the right container, and you just made that book, and you didn't try and make it into something else for the sake of hitting an arbitrary number. And so yes, it's under 20,000 words, but how helpful those 20,000 words are, and how perfectly aligned with the people that are reading it. And also, I imagine your book being a really good support as people are working with you in the coaching side of your business, or in the services side of your business, the containers that you use over there. I mean, you could use that to refer to pages and just say, here's where you can learn more about this, because it's absolutely so aligned.
It happens often. This page, number 18, with the Eisenhower matrix, I have showed this to a number of clients since I published my book in August, and it's only December at the time of recording this. So yeah, this page gets shown a lot to people.
Yeah, I am exactly the same. And if I know somebody's got a copy of it, or if I gift somebody a copy of it, which is so good when you're a service provider, to have something tangible to send people rather than sending them, I don't know, notebooks or other people's books. It's so fantastic. It's such a great piece of branding, really, to be able to refer to a section and just be like, rather than me telling you this for 50th time I've done it, and with far less enthusiasm than I did the first time, go read my book, and you can learn all about it there. So a really great accompaniment. The last little question, because we're coming up to the time that I think is probably getting to be almost too much time, and I could talk about this stuff all day. But last question is, looking back, your experience was what it was. If you were going to do it again, and you're never going to be in that container again, so you would have to do it differently. What would you choose to do differently? What do you wish you'd known the first time around, or what are you glad that you didn't know because you might not have done it? How would you change things for another go around?
Well, knowing what I know now, and you know, you and I spent a bit of time actually co-working. You sort of finished your book, and then I sort of started mine, and it was, yeah, there was a beautiful crossover there. That's something that I would do. Like, it's not different, but it wasn't available in the initial writing part. Like, it was certainly in the editing phase, because the book was submitted, and then I went into my own edits, and then your edits, and then publishing. I would absolutely have an accountability buddy system, whether that's one person or a group of peers. But what I've noticed is that just anybody won't do. And I say that with the utmost of respect to the human race. But there's a certain kind of accountability that I think if I were to sit down and produce another book, that I'd need to be particular as to who was going to support me in that. Knowing what was possible in a container that was so beautifully curated for that, I'd have to find myself something that would work really, really well to ensure that I could produce something in a time frame that I was happy with, that didn't have me feeling guilty because it is taking months longer than I thought, but also to produce something that I could talk with somebody about, and that like-mindedness and that similarity. Like writing, as you mentioned before, in a writers club, is that what you called it?
Writers
Group,
I think is probably the most commonly used term.
Yeah, I think you mentioned there's a lot of people maybe writing novels and things like that. I don't know that I would find that as advantageous personally, as you kind of alluded to. I think I'd need to find another business owner on a similar trajectory, possibly also doing the same thing, because I find that I can tend to be the person who carries if I find someone who can't meet me, and I find that imbalance really frustrating. So finding someone who will meet me where I'm at and then help the both of us move forward is something that I think I would non-negotiably have to do, because otherwise I'm, writing a book is so much just you and your screen that there's the space to debrief and to talk concepts through, and to how do I say this is invaluable.
Yeah. And as a fellow extrovert, which people can probably tell because we're using our hands a lot. Yeah, absolutely. The need to vocalize for a writer who's an extrovert, the need to vocalize comes up quite a lot. So having someone to bounce things around with, so invaluable. And actually, I was talking to or chatting to a mutual online biz friend of ours recently about masterminds, and how often it is not really a genuine mastermind. It's just like a substitute for a group program, and there isn't like this genuine like mutual support. You get out what you put in, that kind of thing. And I really feel like a mastermind situation for creating a book where people are contributing and helping everyone rise, as a genuine mastermind could be like a really great container for particularly people writing nonfiction books. Particularly maybe the second one. I think when you're doing it the first time, there's so much information coming at you that it can be a little bit overwhelming, and that might be better learned from one person, or a focal point. But once you know the information and you know the deal, and then it might be for a second book a really good idea to just have those people who, you're right, there has to be that level of respecting each other's time and putting in what you get out, and not one person being the leader and holding up the whole group or taking it forward. And I know from the times that we've co-worked, outside of our professional relationship, the times that we've co-worked together, like sometimes you'll organize, sometimes I will, and I find that very easy to engage with, because I don't feel like I'm doing all of it. I don't feel like it's all on me to keep this thing going. So that's always really nice, and I know how that can form those to you as well. So
yes, because the book is all on you to keep going.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's really nice to do one of these with somebody that I know so well. And congratulations on your book. Let's just see it one more time.
Thank you.
And where can people get hold of the book if they want a copy?
The best place is to right now to buy it from me, and maybe until I fully embrace the entrepreneurial freedom lifestyle and live in a camper van and travel around the world. Starting in Australia, but for now you can buy it from me. So chenaecarey.com/book is the best place to do that. And if you don't know how to spell my name, I'm sure you'll be able to grab it from the screen here. So
yes, I will link everything up below, and everyone will be able to get a copy of that wherever
amazing.
find it. Thank you so much for today, and
Thank you.
Thank you everyone for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Chenae.
Thank you so much. Bye, Kris.